There is a war going on right now, and most people do not even know they are losing it. It is not a war fought with weapons or armies. It is not a war broadcast on the news or discussed in the halls of power. It is a war fought in the quiet corners of your daily life, in your attention, your energy, your time, and your peace of mind. Every single day, forces you cannot always see are pulling you away from the one thing that could change everything for you, yourself. They want your eyes on their drama. They want your energy fueling their chaos. They want your voice defending things that do not deserve your defense. And the moment you start reacting, the moment you open your mouth when silence would serve you better, the moment you pour yourself into people and places that were never meant to hold you, you lose. You lose ground. You lose clarity. You lose the version of yourself you were meant to become. The ancient Stoics understood something about human nature that took the modern world centuries to catch up with. They understood that the greatest battle any man or woman will ever fight is the internal one. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journals, the journals he never intended for anyone else to read, that the obstacle is the way. That the fire that threatens to destroy you can also be the very thing that forges you into something stronger, something sharper, something the world cannot easily break. He did not write those words for applause. He wrote them as a reminder to himself because even an emperor, the most powerful man in the Roman world, had to fight daily to stay focused, stay grounded, and stay silent in the face of noise. This is not a message for people who want things handed to them. This is not a motivational speech full of empty promises and borrowed fire that burns out before you reach the car. This is a direct transmission from one of the oldest wisdom traditions in human history, a tradition tested not in classrooms or seminars, but on battlefields, in prison cells, in the chambers of empire, and in the quiet agony of personal loss. Stoicism survived because it works. It survived because the men and women who applied it did not merely feel better, they became better. They built better lives. They became the kind of people that history remembers not for what they said, but for what they endured. In the year ahead, the noise will get louder. The distractions will multiply. The demands on your attention will increase. People will come to you with their drama, their insecurities, their need to pull you down to the level where they feel comfortable. And in that environment, the single most powerful thing you can do is also the single most underrated thing in modern culture. You can focus on yourself. You can stay silent. You can become the kind of force that does not announce itself. It simply arrives, fully built, fully present, and fully impossible to ignore. If you have ever found value in the kind of wisdom that actually changes lives, subscribe to this channel right now. Every week, we go deep into Stoic philosophy and pull out the teachings that matter most, not just for ancient Rome, but for the real battles of real life in the world you are living in today. Hit that subscribe button and join a community of people who are done reacting and ready to start building. There is a direct relationship between how much a person talks and how little they have actually built. Walk into any room where real achievement is happening, a surgeon's operating theater, a master craftsman's workshop, a seasoned investor's office late on a trading day, and you will find a common characteristic. Quiet focus. Controlled energy. The deliberate application of attention to what matters. Now walk into the rooms where nothing is being built, where years pass without progress, where people are still telling the same stories and fighting the same battles they were fighting a decade ago. What do you find there? Noise. Endless noise. Argument. Complaint. The constant performance of opinions that have never been tested against reality. Marcus Aurelius spent his reign as emperor of Rome largely in silence about his own inner life. He led armies, managed crises, handled betrayal from people he trusted, buried children, and watched a plague tear through his empire. Through all of it, he did not perform his suffering for the crowd. He did not call press conferences to announce his pain. He wrote in a private journal, a document so personal that scholars still debate whether he ever intended it to be read, and he processed his experience through disciplined reflection rather than public declaration. The result was not a man broken by the weight of his world. It was a man who became one of the greatest leaders in human history, remembered not for his speeches but for his steadiness. Epictetus taught his students that the first and most important discipline is the discipline of desire, learning to want what is actually within your control and releasing what is not. But there is a second discipline that flows naturally from the first, and it is the discipline of speech. Every word you speak is an expenditure of energy. Every opinion you broadcast publicly is an invitation for the world to engage with it, debate it, distort it, and use it against you. Every time you explain yourself when no explanation is required, you are handing power to people who have not earned it and may not deserve it. The Stoics knew this. They protected their inner world the way a general protects strategic intelligence, not out of cowardice, but out of wisdom. The loudest rooms in your life are the most dangerous rooms in your life. Not because they contain bad people, though some of them do, but because they are rooms designed to consume your energy without returning anything of value. Every hour you spend in a loud room performing for an audience that will forget your performance before they reach the parking lot is an hour you did not spend building the life you actually want. In the year ahead, start noticing where your energy goes. Start asking yourself whether the rooms you are spending time in are building you up or slowly draining you dry. The answer to that question may change everything. Silence is not weakness. Silence is not submission. In a world that rewards volume, silence is the most radical act of self-possession available to you. When you refuse to react to provocation, you are not losing. You are demonstrating a level of self-mastery that most people in that room will never achieve. When you stay quiet while others perform their outrage, you are not being passive. You are conserving the very energy that will power your next move. The Stoics called this reserve of inner strength your hegemonikon, your commanding faculty, the part of you that governs your responses and determines the quality of your life. Guard it. Feed it. Refuse to let the loudest rooms in your life drain it dry. Most people think of silence as an absence. They think of it as the blank space between words, the pause between moments of action, the empty gap when nothing meaningful is happening. They have it completely backwards. Silence is not absence. Silence is presence. It is the most concentrated form of presence available to a human being, and the people who have learned to use it, truly use it, not just endure it, are the people who tend to create the most significant lives. When you stop filling every moment with noise, something remarkable begins to happen. Your mind, which has been running at a constant low-grade fever of reaction and response, begins to settle. It begins to sort itself out. Ideas that were buried under the avalanche of daily input start to surface. Problems that seemed impossibly complex begin to reveal their solutions. The path forward that you could not see through the fog of other people's voices starts to become visible. This is not mysticism. This is the basic neurological reality of a brain that has finally been given enough quiet space to do what it was designed to do, think clearly, deeply, and for itself. Seneca wrote in one of his letters to Lucilius that most men would rather flee themselves than be still. He said that the great source of human suffering is not external circumstances, not poverty, not illness, not the cruelty of others, but the inability to sit quietly with oneself. The man who cannot be alone with his own thoughts is the man who will always need noise to drown out what he is unwilling to face. And what he is unwilling to face will continue to control him from the shadows, shaping his choices and driving his reactions without his full awareness. Silence brings those shadows into the light. That is why it frightens so many people. And that is also why it is so essential. When you commit to silence, not complete monastic silence, but the kind of disciplined, intentional silence that says I will not speak unless I have something worth saying, you begin to rebuild your relationship with your own mind. You start to hear your actual thoughts, not the echo of everyone else's opinions. You start to notice your instincts, those deep navigational tools that years of noise have nearly buried. You start to trust yourself again, and that trust, once it returns, becomes the foundation for everything else. Every good decision you will ever make begins with the ability to hear yourself think. Silence gives you that ability back. The practical benefits of this kind of silence are staggering. People who speak less but more deliberately are perceived as more credible, more confident, and more intelligent than people who talk constantly. This has been documented across cultures and across centuries. When you hold your words back, when you let others speak first and listen with genuine attention, you gain information that chatterboxes never get. You see the landscape of a situation before others have even finished describing it. You identify opportunities that loudmouths have already trampled. And when you do finally speak, people lean in. They listen. Because silence has made your voice rare, and rarity creates value. Subscribe to the Stoic Edge if this resonates with something deep in you. We are building a community of people who take this work seriously. People who are done with surface-level motivation and ready for the kind of wisdom that actually reshapes a life from the inside out. Subscribe now and never miss a teaching. You need to understand something fundamental about the world you are navigating. The systems, structures, and social environments around you are not designed with your best interests as their primary concern. They were designed to capture your attention, monetize your engagement, and keep you in a state of constant low-level reactivity that prevents the kind of deep, focused thinking that leads to real independence. This is not a conspiracy theory. It is simply the logical outcome of systems built around competition for your attention and your energy. And the first step to protecting yourself from these systems is to see them clearly for what they are. Social media platforms are the most visible example, but they are far from the only one. The entire architecture of the modern attention economy is designed to trigger your emotional responses, your outrage, your fear, your envy, your insecurity. Because emotional responses generate engagement, and engagement generates revenue. Every time you scroll past something that makes your blood boil and feel the urge to comment, to argue, to defend your position, you are giving the system exactly what it wants. Your reaction is the product. Your distraction is the point. And while you are busy being distracted, whoever built the platform is getting richer and you are getting more agitated, more scattered, and further from the focused, purposeful life you actually want. Epictetus was a slave before he became one of the most celebrated philosophers in the ancient world. He had no rights, no property, no freedom of movement. He had nothing except what he called his prohairesis, his capacity for rational choice, his ability to decide how he would respond to whatever was done to him. And he guarded that capacity with everything he had. He taught his students that no one can take your freedom unless you give it to them. Your master can control your body, your circumstances, your conditions. But your mind, your judgment, your response to life, those belong to you and only to you, unless you surrender them through inattention or reaction. The modern version of Epictetus's chains is not physical. It is the endless scroll, the notification ping, the group chat that never goes quiet, the news cycle that manufactures crisis after crisis to keep you locked in a state of breathless, exhausted engagement. Every time you pick up your phone out of habit rather than intention, every time you check to see whether someone approved of what you posted, every time you let someone else's opinion of you reshape how you feel about yourself, you are giving up the one thing that Epictetus spent his entire life protecting. You are surrendering your prohairesis. You are handing your freedom to a system that will use it to sell you things you do not need and keep you too busy to build what you actually want. The solution is not to destroy your phone or move to the mountains. The solution is to develop the Stoic practice of attention management, learning to decide, in advance and with deliberate intention, where your mental energy goes and where it does not. This is not a passive practice. It is one of the most aggressive and demanding disciplines you will ever attempt. But the men and women who have mastered it, who have learned to focus on themselves and let the noise of the world fall away, are the ones whose lives tend to bear the most fruit. They are the ones who look up 5 years later and realize they have actually built something, while everyone around them was busy reacting to things that no longer matter. There is a practice in Stoicism that the ancient teachers called prosoke, the practice of attending to oneself. Not in the narcissistic, self-obsessed way that modern culture has weaponized the idea of self-focus. Not the endless selfie, the performative wellness routine, the brand-managed version of yourself that you present to the world for approval. Prosoke is something far more demanding and far more rewarding than any of that. It is the practice of genuinely watching yourself, your impulses, your judgments, your habitual reactions, your hidden assumptions, with the same clear-eyed, unsentimental attention that a master craftsman gives to the material he is working with. Marcus Aurelius was one of the most powerful men who ever lived, and he spent a significant portion of his private hours engaged in this practice. Every morning, before the machinery of empire demanded his attention, he examined himself. What had he done well yesterday? Where had he failed to live up to his own principles? What impulse had he indulged that he should have resisted? What opportunity for growth had he missed because he was too comfortable, too proud, or too distracted to see it clearly? He did not do this to punish himself. He did not spiral into guilt or self-recrimination. He did it because a man who does not examine his own life will be forever at the mercy of forces he does not understand, and Marcus Aurelius was committed above all else to living a life under his own governance. Turning inward is terrifying for most people because most people, if they are honest, do not like what they find when they get quiet enough to look. There are patterns there that they have been running from for years: avoidance behaviors, inherited fears, deep-seated beliefs about their own worth that were planted in childhood by people who did not know any better. There is grief they never processed, anger they never examined, potential they never allowed themselves to fully own because it came with too much responsibility. Silence and inwardness drag all of this into the open, and that is uncomfortable in a way that no amount of noise can fully anesthetize. But here is the Stoic truth about that discomfort: it is not a sign that something is wrong. It is a sign that something is right. The pain of self-examination is the pain of a wound being cleaned, necessary, temporary, and ultimately life-saving. The man who turns away from that pain, who fills his hours with distraction rather than face what is waiting for him in the quiet, does not escape his inner life. He merely delays his reckoning with it, and with each passing year, the reckoning grows heavier. The man who turns toward it, who sits down with his own darkness and refuses to flinch, comes out the other side with something that cannot be bought, faked, or borrowed. He comes out with genuine self-knowledge, and self-knowledge is the beginning of every form of real power. The practice does not have to be complicated. It can begin with 10 minutes in the morning, before the phone, before the news, before the demands of the day arrive. 10 minutes of honest self-inventory. What am I carrying that I need to put down? What am I avoiding that I need to face? What are my actual priorities today, and am I living in alignment with them? Those questions, asked with genuine honesty and answered with genuine courage, are the beginning of a practice that will transform your life more thoroughly than any external strategy or self-help formula ever could. There is a profound waste of energy that most people engage in on a daily basis, and it costs them dearly in ways they rarely stop to calculate. It is the habit of explaining themselves, justifying their choices, defending their decisions, seeking the approval or understanding of people who, in many cases, have already made up their minds and are not genuinely open to anything the explanation offers. This habit is understandable. It is rooted in deep human needs for connection, validation, and belonging. But in its compulsive form, it is one of the most damaging things you can do to your own sense of self and your ability to move through life with power and purpose. Marcus Aurelius faced this challenge in the most extreme version imaginable. Every decision he made was subject to scrutiny, criticism, and second-guessing from senators, generals, advisors, and historians. He could not satisfy everyone. He could not explain his choices in ways that would generate universal understanding or approval. And in his journals, he came to a conclusion that is as relevant today as it was in the 2nd century. The only person whose understanding of his choices truly mattered was himself. Not because other people's perspectives were irrelevant, but because the endless pursuit of external validation was a trap, a beautifully constructed trap that kept the person who fell into it permanently dependent on forces outside themselves for their sense of worth and direction. Epictetus was even more direct on this point. He taught that what other people think about you is not your business. Not because you should be callous or indifferent to the human community, but because other people's judgments about you belong to the category of things that are not in your control. You cannot force someone to understand you. You cannot compel someone to approve of your choices. You can explain yourself beautifully, lay out your reasoning with perfect clarity, demonstrate your intentions with complete transparency, and someone who is determined to misunderstand you will still misunderstand you. Someone who has decided to be threatened by your growth will still feel threatened. Someone who needs you to stay small so they feel comfortable will still be uncomfortable with your expansion, no matter how gently or thoroughly you explain it. What you can control is the quality of your own judgment, and the consistency with which you act in alignment with your own clearly defined values. When you stop expending energy on explanations that will not be received, you free up an enormous amount of resources for things that actually move your life forward. You stop waiting for permission. You stop shrinking your vision to the size that others find acceptable. You stop the exhausting performance of justification and start living from the inside out, from a center of self-knowledge and self-direction that no one else's approval or disapproval can touch. This does not mean you stop communicating. It does not mean you become cold, dismissive, or arrogant. It means you become discerning about where your explanations go. You share your reasoning with people who are genuinely invested in understanding and in the relationship. You hold your silence with people who have demonstrated through their pattern of behavior that they are not. That discernment, knowing the difference between the two, is itself a form of Stoic wisdom that will save you years of unnecessary suffering and misdirected energy. One of the most consistent patterns in the lives of people who achieve genuinely remarkable things is how much of their most important work happens out of sight. They are not posting daily updates about the book they are writing. They are writing the book. They are not broadcasting progress reports on the business they are building. They are building the business. They are not performing the process of becoming for an audience of followers. They are becoming. And when the work is done, when the book is finished, the business is launched, the transformation is complete, they emerge into public view with something real, something solid, something that no amount of carefully curated performance could have manufactured. The world sees the result and calls it overnight success. What they do not see is the years of silent, focused, unglamorous work that made the result possible. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. He was writing about fear and anticipatory anxiety, but the principle extends to ambition as well. We often share our goals before we have done any work on them because the act of sharing generates a feeling of progress, a social reward that temporarily satisfies the same psychological need that actual achievement would satisfy, without requiring any of the actual effort. Research has confirmed what Seneca intuited. Telling people about your goals before you have accomplished them can reduce the motivation to actually pursue them, because the social acknowledgement you receive for announcing them feels like a form of completion. The brain, in its extraordinary laziness, accepts the applause and moves on. The Stoic alternative is to build in silence. To let the work be the announcement. To resist the impulse to share every step of the journey and instead trust that the destination will be evidence enough. Marcus Aurelius did not hold press conferences to announce that he was becoming a better person. He simply became one, day after day, in the private discipline of his morning reflections and his evening reviews. Epictetus did not advertise his transformation from slave to philosopher. He transformed, and the transformation spoke for itself. Seneca did not send dispatches from his study announcing that wisdom was in progress. He corresponded honestly with one trusted friend, Lucilius, and let the letters do what letters do, carry real thought between real people, without performance, without audience management. Building in secret is also a form of self-protection that the ancient Stoics understood well. When your plans are unknown, they cannot be sabotaged. When your progress is invisible, it cannot be undermined by the envy or skepticism of people who do not share your vision. When your identity is not publicly tied to a specific outcome, you have the freedom to pivot, to fail without shame, to learn and adjust without it becoming a public spectacle. The work stays clean. The vision stays pure. And when you finally arrive at the destination, you arrive whole, not hollowed out by the performance of becoming, but fully formed by the actual experience of it. If you are finding this message useful, if it is cutting through the noise and speaking to something you have been trying to articulate for yourself, this is exactly why the Stoic Edge exists. Subscribe to this channel and be part of a community that takes these teachings seriously. Every week we go deeper, and it keeps getting more valuable the longer you stay. Imagine a lake. In the morning, before the wind, before the boats, before the day's activity disturbs its surface, it is perfectly still. And in that stillness, it reflects everything around it with extraordinary clarity: the sky, the trees, the mountains. The reflection is so precise, so detailed, so faithful to reality that you might mistake the lake for a mirror. Now imagine a rock thrown into that lake. The surface shatters. The reflection disappears. Everything that was clear becomes distorted, fragmented, impossible to read. And it takes time, sometimes a long time, for the surface to settle back into the stillness that made the clarity possible. Your mind is that lake. Every reaction you have to the provocations, insults, disappointments, and demands of daily life is a rock thrown into it. And every rock you allow in makes it harder to think clearly, to see accurately, and to respond wisely. The Stoics called the practice of keeping that surface still apatheia, which is not the same as apathy in the modern sense. Apatheia does not mean you feel nothing. It means you are not enslaved to your feelings. It means you have developed the space between stimulus and response, the crucial moment where a disciplined mind can choose its reaction rather than being automatically controlled by it. Marcus Aurelius was provoked constantly. He was emperor of a vast, complex empire full of ambitious people, external threats, internal conspiracies, and the daily grinding weight of decisions that affected millions of lives. He dealt with people who lied to him, people who betrayed him, people who questioned his every choice, people who simply could not see what he could see. And in his private writings he returned again and again to the practice of not reacting, of pausing between the provocation and the response, examining the provocation with clear eyes, and choosing his answer from a place of principle rather than impulse. He did not always succeed. But the commitment to the practice shaped the man he became, and the man he became shaped an era. The discipline of not reacting is not passive. It requires more strength, more self-command, and more genuine courage than any reactive outburst ever does. Anyone can explode. Anyone can fire back, lash out, escalate, perform outrage. These are the default responses of an untrained mind. They cost nothing in terms of effort, and they gain nothing in terms of outcome. What takes real work, real discipline, real character is the ability to absorb a provocation, process it honestly, and respond from a place of deliberate choice rather than automatic reaction. That is not weakness. That is the highest expression of the very quality that separates human beings from every other animal on the planet: the capacity for rational self-governance. In practical terms, the discipline of not reacting means building a pause into your life. It means creating the habit of the breath, the literal, physical act of breathing before you respond to anything that triggers an emotional response. It means asking, before you speak or act in anger or fear, whether the response you are about to give is one you would be comfortable with tomorrow morning when the heat of the moment has passed. It means practicing the Stoic question that Marcus Aurelius returned to repeatedly: is this within my control? If not, why am I reacting as though it is? And if it is within my control, what is the best, most reasoned, most principled response available to me? Modern culture has a complicated relationship with energy. It sells you energy in cans and capsules. It glorifies the hustle that burns energy without wisdom. It celebrates the man who is always busy, always on, always producing, always performing, and it rarely asks whether any of that relentless output is going anywhere worth going, or whether the man behind the busyness is building anything that will matter when the noise finally stops. The Stoics had a much cleaner view of energy, which they called pneuma, the vital force that animated the body and the mind. And they were ruthlessly careful about how it was spent. Think of your energy as a finite daily currency. You wake up every morning with a certain amount, and every interaction, every decision, every emotional response, every conversation, every piece of content you consume is a transaction. Some transactions return more than they cost. They leave you more energized, more focused, more aligned with your values and your purpose than you were before. These are the transactions you want to multiply. Other transactions cost more than they return. They leave you depleted, scattered, reactive, and further from the life you are trying to build. These are the transactions you want to eliminate or minimize, regardless of how normal or socially expected they are. Epictetus taught his students to make a ruthlessly honest accounting of their day. Not just in terms of what was accomplished, but in terms of where the vital energy of the day actually went. Who got your best attention today? Who got your leftovers? What did you think about for the longest portion of the day, and was it worth that investment? What conversations did you have that fed your mind and soul, and which ones left you feeling hollowed out and vaguely agitated? These are not comfortable questions. They tend to reveal uncomfortable truths about how far our actual daily habits are from the life we claim to want. But the discomfort of the revelation is vastly preferable to the slow, unexamined leak of a life that runs out of energy before it runs out of time. Focusing on yourself, truly focusing on yourself, not as a performance or an Instagram aesthetic, but as a genuine daily practice, is fundamentally an energy management strategy. It means directing your best hours toward the things that matter most: your craft, your health, your relationships of genuine depth, your character, your mind, your vision for the life ahead. It means protecting those hours from the thousand small demands, distractions, and obligations that feel urgent in the moment but are not actually important. It means learning to say no not just to people but to impulses, habits, and environments that quietly drain what is most precious to you. Seneca had one of the most direct warnings in all of ancient literature about this exact issue. He said that it is not that life is short. It is that we waste so much of it. He said that a man who receives 10,000 coins and spends most of them on things that do not serve him does not blame the fortune for running out. He blames himself. The same logic applies to time and energy. The man who reaches the end of his life and finds that it ran out before he finished what mattered to him cannot blame the universe for his shortage. He must examine where the energy went, and more often than not, it went to other people's priorities, other people's dramas, other people's urgency dressed up as his own. There is a phenomenon that people who have done serious inner work tend to recognize almost immediately when they see it in others. It is the transformation that happens when a man goes quiet, not in defeat, not in despair, but in the deliberate, disciplined way of someone who has decided to stop performing and start building. He disappears from the social landscape for a period. His presence decreases in the places where presence was performance. And then, after months or years of that quiet, focused, inward-turned work, he reappears, and there is something fundamentally different about him. He is clearer. He is more settled. He carries himself with the kind of easy confidence that cannot be faked because it was not constructed on other people's opinions. It was built on the substance of actual work, actual growth, and actual self-knowledge. This pattern is not accidental. It is the natural result of what happens when a person stops dividing their energy between building and performing and puts everything into the building. The Stoics understood this intuitively because they had no social media, no culture of constant visibility, no infrastructure for broadcasting every step of the personal development journey. They simply did the work. They read, they reflected, they practiced, they failed, they adjusted, they tried again. And the ones who committed most deeply to that process became the people whose words and examples we are still drawing from more than 2,000 years later, not because they were born extraordinary, but because they were ordinary people who did extraordinary things with their attention. Silence, in this context, is not retreat. It is investment. Every hour you spend in silence working on your craft is an hour of compound interest accumulating on the principle of your actual self. Every conversation you decline to enter because it offers nothing of value is a transaction you avoided, and the energy you saved goes somewhere more important. Every explanation you chose not to give, every argument you chose not to have, every performance you chose not to stage, each of these is a small act of investment in the person you are becoming, and the person you are becoming is the single greatest gift you will ever offer to the people who actually deserve your best. Marcus Aurelius writes in his journals about men he admired, teachers, mentors, relatives who shaped his character before his reign began. And what strikes a careful reader about his descriptions of these men is what he does not mention. He does not praise them for being the loudest in the room. He does not celebrate them for their social presence or their public performances. He praises them for the quality of their thinking, the consistency of their principles, the depth of their patience, the quietness of their virtue. The men who shaped the emperor were not men who demanded attention. They were men who had something genuinely worth attending to, and in the presence of that genuine substance, attention came naturally. This is the promise at the heart of the Stoic practice of silence and self-focus. You are not disappearing. You are preparing. You are not withdrawing from the world. You are building the version of yourself that the world will genuinely benefit from. And when you return, fully formed, deeply grounded, clear on your purpose and capable of pursuing it with everything you have, the silence that preceded you will have been not just understandable but essential. It will have been the forge. And you will have been the steel. Marcus Aurelius governed the Roman Empire for nearly 2 decades. He fought wars on multiple frontiers simultaneously. He managed a bureaucratic apparatus of extraordinary complexity. He dealt with natural disasters, economic crises, military rebellions, and the devastating Antonine Plague, which killed millions of his people and a significant portion of his army. By any objective measure, he had more competing demands on his attention than virtually any other person in the history of the world. And yet, the man who left behind the meditations, those private reflections that have shaped the thinking of generals, statesmen, artists, and ordinary people across 20 centuries, was, at his core, a man who had mastered the art of focus. What was the secret? What allowed Marcus Aurelius to maintain clarity, purpose, and philosophical discipline in the midst of conditions that would have broken most people? The answer, drawn from the pages of his own reflections, comes down to a practice of radical present-tense focus combined with an equally radical acceptance of what could not be controlled. He did not try to solve next year's problems today. He did not exhaust himself rehearsing catastrophes that had not yet occurred and might never occur. He did not scatter his attention across the entire landscape of everything that needed managing and instead lose the thread of everything at once. He focused on this day, this decision, this action, this moment, and he brought to that focus the full weight of his prepared mind, his disciplined character, and his deeply held principles. The Stoic concept of the present moment is not the same as the modern mindfulness instruction to clear your mind and simply observe. It is more demanding than that and more practical. Marcus Aurelius was not trying to escape the past or the future by collapsing into a thoughtless present. He was bringing the lessons of the past and the vision of the future into a single focused point of present action. He was saying, all of the wisdom I have gathered, all of the character I have built, all of the values I hold and the principles I have committed to, all of it is present right here, in this moment, available to guide what I do next. That is focus in its deepest sense. That is what it looks like when a fully formed man meets the present moment and gives it everything he has. What most people experience instead is the opposite. The past pulls them back, old grievances, old wounds, old failures that replay themselves in the quiet moments and sap the confidence needed for present action. The future pulls them forward, anxiety about outcomes they cannot control, fear of failure, anticipatory dread that exhausts them before they even begin. And in between, the present moment goes unattended, unserved by either the lessons of the past or the vision of the future, because the mind is never fully there. The result is a life that feels scattered, unfocused, perpetually behind, and perpetually overwhelmed, not because the circumstances are too much, but because the attention that should be managing the circumstances is chronically divided. The remedy Marcus Aurelius prescribes is deceptively simple. Begin where you are, with what you have, on what is in front of you. Strip away everything that does not bear directly on the quality of your present action. Ask not what the ideal circumstances would allow, but what your best self can do within the actual circumstances you are in. This is not resignation. It is precision. It is the application of focused energy to the actual situation rather than the imaginary one. And it is, without exaggeration, one of the most powerful tools available to any person who wants to move from where they are to where they want to be. We are going deep on this channel, deeper than most places will take you. If you want to keep exploring these ideas and building a life that reflects what you are learning, subscribe to the Stoic Edge right now. Hit the subscribe button, join the community, and let's keep building together. One of the most difficult applications of Stoic philosophy in the modern world is the one that touches on human relationships. It is relatively easy to practice Stoic discipline when it involves your own thoughts and habits. It is considerably harder when it involves the people in your life. But the reality that the Stoics addressed with characteristic directness is this: some of the greatest strains on your energy, your peace, and your potential are not abstract systems or cultural forces. They are specific people whose patterns of behavior, whether intentional or not, consistently pull you away from your best self and toward a version of yourself you have worked hard to leave behind. This is not a call to cold-blooded social calculation or to the elimination of everyone who is not perfectly aligned with your growth. Human beings are complex, relationships are layered, and genuine love sometimes requires enduring difficulty. But there is a meaningful difference between the difficulty of depth, the friction that comes from genuine intimacy, honest disagreement, and real accountability, and the toxicity of patterns that never resolve, conversations that always circle back to the same destructive place, relationships that extract your energy and return nothing but drama and obligation. Epictetus taught that we should consider carefully who we spend our time with, because we tend to become like the people around us, not because we are weak, but because human beings are inherently social and deeply responsive to the social environment. Your habits, your language, your emotional baseline, your ambition, your willingness to endure discomfort in service of growth, all of these are shaped by the company you keep, more than most people are comfortable admitting. Spend most of your time with people who are complacent, and complacency will begin to feel normal. Spend most of your time with people who are growing, building, and thinking seriously about their lives, and the gravitational pull on your own life shifts accordingly. The Stoic practice here is not about judging other people or declaring yourself superior to those you choose to spend less time with. It is about honest stewardship of your own resources. You have a finite amount of time. You have a finite amount of attention. You have a finite amount of emotional energy. These resources are the raw materials of your life, the actual substance from which your future will be built. Investing them wisely is not selfishness. It is the basic responsibility that every serious person has to themselves and, ultimately, to everyone who depends on them. The man who drains himself dry in the service of relationships that take everything and return nothing is not being noble. He is being irresponsible with the only life he has. Seneca wrote to Lucilius, "Withdraw into yourself as much as you can, associate with those who will make you better, and welcome those who you can improve." This is the Stoic approach to community. Generous but intentional, open but discerning. It asks you to be the kind of person who raises others up, and it asks you to prioritize those who raise you up in return. It does not ask you to be alone. It asks you to be selective enough about your associations that the ones you choose are worth the investment, for both parties. That is not cutting people off. That is curating your world with the same care that a master craftsman gives to the selection of his tools. Contemporary culture is allergically resistant to the long game. Everything in the modern environment screams for immediate results, instant feedback, rapid gratification, and quick returns. The news cycle measures significance in hours. Social media measures success in likes accumulated within the first 24 minutes of a post. Business culture celebrates the unicorn startup that went from 0 to billion in 18 months while quietly ignoring the thousands of companies that failed trying to replicate the same rush trajectory. We have collectively become so oriented towards speed that patience, genuine, principled, strategic patience, has become one of the rarest and most undervalued human qualities in circulation. The Stoics were not patient in the passive sense, sitting back and waiting for life to deliver what they wanted. Their patience was active, disciplined, and grounded in a clear understanding of how real things actually get built. Marcus Aurelius knew that the character of an emperor was not formed in a single heroic moment. It was formed in 10,000 small daily choices: the choice to study when leisure was available, to exercise restraint when indulgence was easy, to listen carefully when impatience beckoned, to act justly when expedience was tempting. No single one of those choices was dramatic. None of them would have made a compelling news headline. But the accumulation of them across years and decades produced a man of such extraordinary depth and stability that his private reflections are still being read by serious people all around the world 20 centuries after his death. Seneca, in one of his most striking observations, noted that trees that grow slowly tend to have the hardest, most durable wood. The rapid-growing trees are often the first to fall in a storm because their trunks are soft, their roots shallow, their structure unable to bear the weight of serious weather. The same principle applies to human development, human achievement, and human character. The man who builds himself over years, slowly, consistently, without shortcuts, without the need to announce his progress to anyone, ends up with something that the man who tried to get there fast simply does not have: a foundation that holds under real pressure. The long game in the Stoic tradition means playing for the quality of your life rather than the appearance of it. It means measuring your success not by how impressive your story sounds at a dinner party but by whether the actual texture of your daily experience is one you can be proud of, whether you are using your time and energy in alignment with your deepest values, whether you are building something that will matter when the immediate applause has faded. It means tolerating the discomfort of being misunderstood in the short term because you can see clearly enough to know where you are going in the long term, and that destination justifies the patience required to reach it properly. Playing the long game also means developing a different relationship with failure. The short game treats failure as evidence that the direction was wrong and the effort was wasted. The long game treats failure as data, information about what does not work, where the approach needs adjustment, where the foundation needs strengthening. Marcus Aurelius failed. Seneca failed. Epictetus endured conditions that could legitimately be described as catastrophic. None of them let failure become the final word on their capacity. They extracted the lesson, adjusted the approach, and continued the work. That is the long game in practice, not the absence of setback, but the refusal to let setback become a permanent stop. There is a version of you that exists in other people's minds that has nothing to do with who you actually are. It is constructed from their projections, their fears, their past experiences, their own unexamined needs and insecurities. Some of those people like that version of you, but what they like is a reflection of themselves, not a portrait of you. Others are threatened by it, critical of it, dismissive of it, and again, what they are responding to has very little to do with the actual person you are working to become. The tragedy is not that these versions of you exist in the world. The tragedy is when you let them define you. The tragedy is when you make decisions about your life, your growth, and your potential based on what people think of a version of you that is not actually true. Marcus Aurelius returned to this theme repeatedly in his journals because it was clearly a live battle for him. He was surrounded by people who had opinions about who he was and who he should be, some of them well-meaning, some of them politically motivated, some of them simply wrong. And he had to resist, constantly, the gravitational pull of those opinions. Not because other people's perspectives were worthless, but because the moment he allowed his sense of himself to become dependent on external judgment, he lost the very quality that made his leadership possible, the ability to act from principle rather than from the need for approval. Epictetus was even more blunt. He pointed out that we have no control over what other people think of us. None. We can influence it. We can be consistent enough in our character and actions that over time a reasonably accurate reputation forms around us, but we cannot control the process. Every attempt to manage other people's perceptions of us is an attempt to govern something that is fundamentally outside our governance, and it costs us energy that could be going somewhere that actually matters. The wise person accepts this limitation, adjusts their investment accordingly, and redirects the energy that would have gone into impression management into the actual substance of their character and their work. Your story is yours to write. Not the story you perform for others, not the curated version of yourself that you present on social media or in the carefully managed narrative you tell at family gatherings, but the actual story, the one being written right now in the choices you make when no one is watching, in the habits you maintain when the motivation is low, and the character you bring to situations that test you when there is no audience to applaud the result. That story is the one that matters. That is the story that will determine the quality of your life, the depth of your relationships, and the weight of your legacy. And it cannot be written by anyone but you. If you have been allowing someone else, a critic, a parent, an ex, a social media mob, a cultural script you inherited without examining, to hold the pen of your own story, today is the day to take it back. Not dramatically. Not with a proclamation or a public performance of liberation. Quietly. Firmly. With the simple, decisive act of choosing differently, of acting in alignment with your own values rather than your audience's expectations, and seeing what happens when you give your actual self the room to show up fully. Subscribe to this channel right now if you are ready to take that pen back. The Stoic Edge is here every week with the kind of wisdom that makes that possible, real, applicable, grounded in the teachings of men who actually live these principles under fire. Subscribe and let's go deeper. In the ancient world, military commanders understood something that many modern professionals have forgotten: information is power, and the disclosure of information, even inadvertently, even in small amounts, shifts the balance of power in ways that can be decisive. The general who reveals his strategy before the battle gives his enemy time to prepare a response. The negotiator who shows his hand before terms are settled loses leverage that cannot be recovered. The builder who announces his project before the foundation is laid invites interference, competition, and unsolicited opinion into a process that would have been cleaner and stronger if it had been allowed to develop in private. This is not merely strategic cynicism. It is the recognition of a basic truth about human social dynamics. People tend to respond to what they see, and what they see influences the outcome. When your growth is visible in its early stages, when you are still in the messy, uncertain, vulnerable phase of becoming, you expose yourself to the kind of input that can derail you. Not necessarily malicious input. Sometimes the most damaging interventions come from people who genuinely care about you but who cannot see what you see, and whose concern translates into doubt-seeding that attaches itself to the insecurity you were already carrying. Your dream does not need to survive the opinions of people who do not fully understand it. Your vision does not need to justify itself before it has had a chance to prove itself. The silence you maintain around your most important plans is not secrecy in the negative sense. It is protection of the space in which something valuable is being created. Seneca knew this. In his letters, he cautioned against the man who discusses his philosophy before he has lived it, who talks about virtue before he has practiced it, who announces his commitments before he has tested them. Not because the announcements are dishonest, but because the act of announcing tends to substitute for the act of doing. The man who has told 20 people about the book he is writing has, in a very real psychological sense, already received some of the reward that was supposed to come from actually writing the book. And that reception, premature and unearned as it is, dulls the hunger that drives the work. Strategic silence is also a tool in relationships and negotiations that the Stoics applied with considerable sophistication. When you speak less, you listen more. When you listen more, you understand more. When you understand more, your responses become more accurate, more timely, and more effective. The person who rushes to fill every silence with their own words misses the intelligence that was being offered in the quiet between words. The person who is comfortable with silence in a conversation, who can let a moment breathe, who does not feel compelled to fill every gap, creates a space where other people tend to reveal exactly what they actually think and want. That information is worth a great deal more than the words you would have spent if you had rushed to fill the silence yourself. Marcus Aurelius, in his practical governance of the empire, was known for listening more than he spoke in council. He gathered information, weighed it carefully, consulted with multiple perspectives, and rendered decisions with a deliberateness that was noted by his contemporaries. He did not feel the need to fill every room he entered with the sound of his own certainty. He was comfortable being the quietest man in the room and the most informed one at the same time. That combination, the quiet that listens and the mind that processes, is one of the most powerful configurations available to any person who aspires to genuine leadership in any domain. The Stoics were remarkably modern in their understanding of habit. Long before neuroscience developed the language to describe what they observed, they were articulating the reality that character is not something you have. It is something you do, repeatedly, consistently, over a long enough period that the behavior becomes automatic, and the automatic behavior becomes identity. Marcus Aurelius understood this with crystalline clarity. His journals are full of references to the effort of building and sustaining habits of thought and action that aligned with the philosopher king he was trying to be. Not because he was starting from weakness, but because he understood that no level of natural capability exempts a person from the daily work of maintaining and strengthening the character that capability rests on. Epictetus taught that we do not rise to the level of our ideals, we fall to the level of our systems. The man who says he values discipline but has no systematic practice of discipline in his daily life does not actually have discipline. He has the desire for discipline, which is a very different and much less powerful thing. The man who says he values wisdom but spends his hours consuming content that offers no genuine insight does not actually have wisdom. He has the performance of interest in wisdom without any of the substance. The gap between what we say we value and what our daily habits reflect is the gap between the life we want and the life we actually live, and the only bridge across that gap is the unglamorous daily practice of doing what you value rather than merely believing in it. What does your morning look like? Not the morning you tell yourself you are working toward, but the morning you actually have right now. How does it begin? What does your body do first, before your conscious mind has fully engaged? What is the first thing you reach for? What is the first piece of content your mind consumes? How does the hour after waking, which research consistently identifies as one of the highest quality mental hours of the day, actually get spent in your actual life? These are not comfortable questions for most people, because most people know that the honest answers reveal a significant gap between their stated values and their actual habits. And that gap, unaddressed, compounds over time in the wrong direction. The Stoic approach to habit formation is not about white-knuckling your way to better behavior through sheer willpower. It is about architecture. It is about designing the environment, the schedule, and the social context of your daily life in ways that make the behaviors you want to cultivate the path of least resistance, and the behaviors you want to eliminate inconvenient and effortful. Marcus Aurelius had his evening review and his morning intention, structured rituals that bookend each day with reflection and purpose. Epictetus had his school, a physical space dedicated to a certain kind of thinking and engagement. Seneca had his correspondence, a practice of epistolary reflection that forced regular articulation of ideas and thus strengthened his philosophical commitments through the act of expressing them. Your habits are compounding right now. In every moment of your actual life, the way you behave is either reinforcing a pattern that serves you or one that does not. The question is not whether compounding is happening. It is happening, whether you intend it or not. The question is whether you are directing it consciously, with the long-term intention of the person you are committed to becoming, or whether you are letting it proceed on autopilot, shaped by whatever default patterns your environment and your unconscious preferences have installed. The Stoic invitation is to take the wheel. To become the author of your own habits rather than their passenger. There is a version of self-focus that is ultimately selfish, a kind of spiritual narcissism dressed up in the language of personal development, in which the entire project of growth is in service of a more impressive self with a more impressive resume and a more impressive presentation to the world. The Stoics had no patience for this version. To them, the entire point of self-cultivation was not the cultivation itself. It was what the cultivated person could offer to others, to community, to the common project of human civilization. This is what Marcus Aurelius meant when he wrote about his duty to the human race, not a burden, not a performance, but a natural and joyful expression of the philosophical truth that human beings are social animals who flourish in relation to one another, and that the best thing you can do for others is to become genuinely good yourself. Epictetus argued that philosophy was not a credential or a comfort. It was a discipline of transformation that made you, concretely and practically, more useful to the people around you. The philosophical person was not the person who could recite the most passages from Plato. It was the person who, when things went wrong, brought steadiness rather than panic. When others were being petty, brought perspective. When the group was being cowardly, brought courage. When the situation called for wisdom, could actually offer it rather than just perform it. Philosophy, in the Stoic sense, was the training that made you capable of showing up for others in ways that actually helped rather than ways that merely performed helpfulness. When you focus on yourself, when you take your health seriously, your mind seriously, your character seriously, your habits and your energy, and your long-term vision seriously, you are not withdrawing from the world. You are preparing to give it something genuinely valuable. The person who neglects themselves, who runs their body and mind into the ground in the name of sacrifice, who never develops their own capacities because they are always too busy reacting to other people's needs, this person eventually has nothing left to give. They are running on empty, and what gets distributed from an empty vessel is not love or wisdom or generosity. It is exhaustion, resentment, and desperation dressed up as giving. The world needs you to be rested. It needs you to be clear-headed. It needs you to be building the capacities that allow you to show up with something real rather than something performed. It needs you to be the kind of person who has done enough inner work to be genuinely present with others, not just physically present while your mind is somewhere else, not just going through the motions of care while you are depleted beyond the point of actual attention. The Stoic commitment to self-development is ultimately a commitment to the quality of your contribution to everything and everyone you are connected to. Focus on yourself not because the world does not matter, but because the quality of what you bring to the world depends on the quality of what you bring to yourself first. The Stoic edge exists to help you bring your best. If that mission resonates with you, if you want to be part of a channel that takes these ideas seriously and goes as deep as they need to go, subscribe now. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And let's keep building. Nothing tests your Stoic practice like betrayal. Betrayal by someone you trusted, someone you invested in, someone who had access to the most vulnerable parts of your confidence, and chose to exploit that access rather than honor it. Betrayal is the kind of pain that reaches deep, not just because of what it takes from you materially or socially, but because of what it says about your judgment, your openness, your willingness to trust. The temptation after betrayal is to close down, to become calculating and guarded and permanently suspicious, to protect yourself from future pain by simply never again offering anyone the access that made the betrayal possible. Marcus Aurelius was betrayed. In ways that we can only partially reconstruct from historical records, people he trusted, including those in his immediate circle, acted in ways that were disloyal, self-serving, and damaging. And in his journals he worked through his response to this with the same philosophical rigor he applied to everything else. His conclusion was neither the bitterness of the wounded man nor the naivete of the man who has learned nothing. It was something far more sophisticated, the recognition that human nature is what it is, that people sometimes fail to live up to the best of themselves, and that expecting otherwise is a form of philosophical error that generates unnecessary suffering. This is not the same as saying betrayal does not hurt. It does. The Stoics never claimed to be numb to pain, and the idea that Stoicism requires emotional suppression is one of the great misunderstandings of the tradition. What Stoicism offers in the face of betrayal is not numbness but perspective, the ability to feel the pain fully and honestly without letting it calcify into a permanent and generalized bitterness that punishes everyone you meet going forward, including the people who never betrayed you and never would. Seneca wrote that we do wrong to be angry with those who wrong us, not because they do not deserve our anger, but because anger poisons the vessel it inhabits more than the target at which it is directed. The man consumed by bitterness over a past betrayal is not punishing the person who betrayed him. He is punishing himself, continuously, in every subsequent moment that the bitterness colors. The wise response, the Stoic response, is to grieve what was lost, extract whatever lesson the experience offers, adjust your trust accordingly, and then release the poison before it does permanent damage to the quality of your remaining life. Focusing on yourself after betrayal means directing the energy that wants to go into revenge, rumination, or the broadcasting of grievance, and pointing it back toward your own building. It means letting the experience make you wiser rather than harder. There is a difference between wisdom, which increases your capacity for accurate judgment, and hardness, which decreases your capacity for genuine connection. The Stoic response to betrayal chooses wisdom. It stays open in principle while becoming more discerning in practice. It continues to trust the right people more fully rather than distrusting everyone equally. In the Stoic tradition, the morning was not an accident. It was the first battlefield of the day, and the philosophers who took their practice most seriously treated it with the strategic attention that any serious campaign deserves. What you do with the first hour of your day is not merely a matter of productivity or efficiency. It is a statement of values, a lived declaration of what matters most to you and what kind of person you are committed to being in the hours that follow. The morning practice is where you set the terms for the day before the day sets its terms for you. Marcus Aurelius began each day with a practice of premeditation, a technique the Stoics called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. Before the day began, he would call to mind the difficulties it was likely to bring, the ingratitude, the pettiness, the small injustices and larger provocations that the day would almost certainly contain, and he would prepare his response in advance. Not to generate anxiety, but to remove surprise. The man who has already thought about how to handle ingratitude does not lose his equilibrium when he encounters it. He has already processed the emotional response and prepared the principled one. He moves through the difficulty without being disrupted by it because it was never unexpected in the first place. The second element of the Stoic morning was intention. Not the vague, motivational poster kind of intention that says today I will be my best self. The specific, grounded, intellectually honest kind that says today I will face these specific challenges, bring these specific values to bear, practice these specific disciplines, and measure my success against these specific standards, not against what anyone else thinks of me, not against the appearance of productivity, but against the integrity of my own commitments. This kind of morning intention creates a thread you can follow through the day, a north star that keeps you oriented when the inevitable chaos of human life tries to pull you sideways. The third element was gratitude, not performed gratitude, not the gratitude you express because someone told you it would improve your mood, but the genuine philosophical recognition that you are alive, that you have the use of your faculties, that the day ahead contains real possibilities if you meet it with real engagement. Seneca wrote about this constantly, the astonishing fact of being here at all, of having a mind capable of thought, and a body capable of action, and a day full of hours that belong entirely to you if you are wise enough to claim them. That recognition, held consciously at the start of the day, tends to generate a quality of engagement with what follows that no amount of caffeine or motivational content can replicate. Start tomorrow. Not with a complicated ritual or an elaborate program that requires an entirely different schedule. Start with 5 minutes. 5 minutes before the phone, before the news, before any external input at all. Sit with yourself. Review yesterday honestly. Set your intention for today with specificity. Remind yourself of what actually matters and why. Then carry that reminder into the day and see what happens to the quality of your choices, your responses, and your experience of your own life. The Stoics were not theorizing. They were prescribing. And the prescription has been validated by 2,000 years of application. It works. But only if you use it. The Stoics lived in a world with sharp hierarchies, emperor and slave, senator and citizen, free man and captive, and they had sophisticated things to say about the relationship between external goods like wealth and status and the internal goods that actually constitute a good life. Their position was nuanced in a way that tends to be misrepresented. They did not teach that wealth is evil or that poverty is noble. They taught something more careful and ultimately more powerful, that external goods are preferred indifference, things it is generally better to have than not have, all else being equal, but things whose presence or absence does not determine the quality of your character or the depth of your happiness. Seneca was one of the wealthiest men in Rome. He was Nero's advisor, he owned multiple estates, he had significant social influence. And he wrote with extraordinary honesty about the danger of allowing wealth to become the measure of a life. He did not abandon his wealth, but he held it loosely, in the way the Stoics described as owning things without being owned by them. He wrote that the wise man is not troubled by either poverty or wealth because either one can take from him the one thing that actually constitutes his good life, the quality of his judgment, the alignment of his actions with his values, the freedom of his inner life from the tyranny of externals. The modern application of this teaching is both obvious and demanding. Obvious because the culture we live in measures human worth almost entirely in external terms: net worth, social status, professional title, the kind of car in the driveway, and the zip code of the home. Demanding because resisting that measurement system while living inside it requires a constant, active philosophical commitment that does not simply happen by default. It has to be chosen, repeatedly, against the gravitational pull of a culture that will consistently tell you, in 1,000 small ways, that your worth is a function of what you have and who you know and what people think of you. The Stoic counter-narrative is not that external success is bad. It is that external success pursued for its own sake, as the end rather than the byproduct of genuinely good work and genuinely good character, tends to generate a specific kind of hollowness that no amount of further external success can fill. The man who has built his sense of self on the foundation of status is a man whose foundation can be removed at any time by forces entirely outside his control. The man who has built his sense of self on the foundation of character has a foundation that cannot be touched by any external reversal. Focus on yourself means, among other things, focusing on the quality of your character before the quantity of your acquisitions. It means asking whether the life you are building is one you would recognize as genuinely good, genuinely aligned with your deepest values, genuinely expressive of your best capacities, genuinely in service of something larger than your own comfort, rather than merely impressive when evaluated by metrics you inherited from a culture that may not actually know what a good life looks like. There will be periods in your life when the darkness is not metaphorical. When actual things go wrong, the health scare, the financial collapse, the relationship that ends badly, the loss of someone irreplaceable, the failure of a project you gave everything to. These are the moments when philosophy reveals whether it is genuine or decorative, whether the Stoic teachings you have absorbed actually live in your bones and alter your behavior under fire, or whether they were pleasant ideas that vanished the moment reality got serious enough to test them. Marcus Aurelius wrote the Meditations during one of the darkest periods of his reign. The Antonine Plague was sweeping through his empire. He was conducting military campaigns on the Danube frontier in conditions of extreme hardship. The people he loved were dying. The empire he was responsible for was under pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. And in the midst of all of this, he was writing to himself, not heroically, not with the performed calm of a man who wants to appear unbreakable, but honestly, with the acknowledgement of struggle and the recommitment to principle that characterizes a man who is actually in the battle rather than watching from a comfortable distance. What Marcus Aurelius demonstrates in those journals is the essence of the Stoic response to darkness. You do not pretend it is not dark. You do not perform invulnerability. You do not gaslight yourself into a toxic positivity that denies the reality of your experience. You look at the darkness directly, with the full clarity of your trained and honest mind, and you say, "This is real, this is difficult, and I am going to find the best available response to it." Not the perfect response. There may be no perfect response. The best available response. The one that is most aligned with your values and most likely to produce the outcome you actually want, given the actual conditions you are actually in. Epictetus, who had every reason to be consumed by bitterness and despair, who was a slave, who had limited options and no guaranteed future, chose instead to focus on the one domain that was entirely his own, his inner life. His response to his condition was not acceptance in the sense of passive surrender. It was the aggressive, defiant, philosophical insistence that no external circumstance could determine the quality of his inner experience unless he allowed it to. The chains on his body did not chain his mind. The conditions of his life did not determine the character of his soul. And that distinction, between what is done to you and what you make of what is done to you, is the heart of the Stoic response to darkness. When your world goes dark, focus inward. Not to escape the darkness, but to find the lamp. The lamp that the Stoics describe is not a comforting illusion. It is the quality of your own character, your courage, your patience, your capacity for honest assessment and principled action, applied to the situation in front of you. It may not eliminate the difficulty. It may not change the outcome. But it will change how you move through the difficulty, and it will change who you are when you come out the other side. And who you are when you come out the other side is the only legacy that belongs entirely to you. Criticism is one of the great tests of philosophical maturity. It is easy to believe that you have separated your identity from your ego until someone delivers a pointed, public, unflattering assessment of something you worked hard to create, or carefully to become. In that moment, The moment when someone is telling the audience that you got it wrong, that your work is substandard, that your judgment was poor, that your character is flawed, the philosophical commitment to equanimity meets its most honest test. And what happens in that moment reveals more about the depth of your practice than any reflection written in a private journal. Marcus Aurelius received criticism constantly, from political enemies, from people who believed they were qualified to do his job better than he could, from historians who were writing about his decisions in real time, and not always kindly. His response, as best we can reconstruct it, was a model of the Stoic middle path, neither dismissiveness nor defensive collapse. He took what was accurate from the criticism and used it. He released what was inaccurate without anger or extended energy. He maintained the ability to distinguish between useful feedback and performance, between criticism that was genuinely trying to help him think more clearly and criticism that was designed to wound, to destabilize, or to serve the agenda of the critic rather than the improvement of its subject. This distinction, between criticism as information and criticism as attack, is one of the most valuable skills in the entire Stoic toolkit, and it requires practice to develop well. The untrained mind tends to treat all criticism as attack and therefore either becomes defensive at useful feedback or collapses under feedback that was never meant constructively. The trained mind creates the space for honest evaluation. Is there something true here that I can use? Is the source of this criticism someone who has genuine insight into this domain and genuine concern for the outcome? Or is this criticism a performance, an attempt to establish hierarchy, to manage insecurity, to punish the very act of having put something out into the world? Epictetus taught his students that the opinions of others are not in our control, and therefore should not determine our actions or our self-assessment. But he also taught that wisdom requires the humility to know that we do not have perfect self-knowledge, and that sometimes the people watching us from outside can see things we cannot see about ourselves. The practice is to hold both truths simultaneously. Your judgment of yourself is ultimately sovereign, and you may still have blind spots that honest outside feedback can illuminate. Neither extreme, the defensive dismissal of all criticism or the anxious capitulation to every criticism, serves your growth or your character. When someone criticizes you this week, and someone will, try the Stoic practice, pause, breathe, ask whether the criticism contains information you can use. If it does, extract the information and say thank you, either literally or internally. If it does not, if it is performance, or attack or the projection of someone else's unprocessed material, release it without ceremony and redirect your attention to what actually deserves it. Neither response requires drama. Neither response requires a public defense of your position. The work continues regardless of what anyone says about it. Character is not built in the moments when you are seen. It is built in the moments when you are not. The decision to keep the commitment when there is no one to witness the commitment. The choice to be honest when the lie would be easy and undetected. The maintenance of your standard when the standard is optional, and no one would know the difference. The decision to treat someone with respect and dignity when they cannot repay you for it, and no one is watching to credit you for the generosity. These invisible choices are the actual substance of character, and they compound over time in ways that become visible to everyone, not immediately, not dramatically, but with the unmistakable weight of accumulated integrity. Seneca wrote that virtue must be its own reward, because virtue that depends on external recognition for its sustainability is not genuine virtue. It is performance. And performance, however impressive in the moment, cannot build the kind of inner architecture that holds when the performance is not enough, when the circumstances get hard enough that only actual character can navigate them. The man who has built his sense of himself on the applause of others is a man who will collapse the moment the applause stops. The man who has built his sense of himself on the invisible foundation of who he is when no one is looking will not be impressed or destroyed by what anyone says about him, because he knows the difference between the story and the reality. Building character in the dark means practicing your principles in private before applying them in public. It means beginning the discipline before there is anything to show for it. It means sustaining the habit when it is producing no visible results, when the scale has not moved, when the bank account has not grown, when the skill has not yet produced anything presentable, when the work has not yet arrived at the quality that justifies public display. This is the hardest phase of any serious endeavor, the phase when you are doing the work without the feedback, when the investment is being made without any visible return, when faith in the process is all you have because the evidence has not yet arrived. Marcus Aurelius practiced this his entire life. Even as emperor, in a position where his behavior was visible to everyone and consequential in the most literal way, he treated his private character as the primary standard. It was not enough for his actions to look good from the outside. They had to be good from the inside, arising from genuine conviction and principled reasoning rather than political calculation and image management. The consistency between his public behavior and his private character was not accidental. It was the result of years of cultivation in the quiet spaces of his inner life, long before he was in a position where that character was required at the highest level. Your character is being built right now, in the quality of your attention and your choices and your commitments, in the quiet hours that no one else is monitoring. What is being built there? What kind of person is being assembled in the invisible spaces of your daily life? Is the person who will show up in the moments when it actually counts. Build that person carefully. Build that person honestly. Build that person in the dark, where the building is genuine and the foundation is real. There is a misunderstanding that follows Stoicism wherever its reputation precedes it. The idea that Stoic stillness is a kind of withdrawal from life, a passive non-engagement with the world, a philosophical surrender dressed up as wisdom. This misunderstanding does a profound disservice to what the Stoics actually taught, and what the most effective practitioners of Stoicism actually did. Marcus Aurelius was not still in the sense of inactive. He was one of the most active, productive, and consequential leaders in human history. Seneca was not still in the sense of withdrawn. He was deeply engaged with the political and intellectual life of his era, sometimes dangerously so. Epictetus was not still in the sense of passive. He ran a school, taught generations of students, and engaged vigorously with the philosophical questions of his time. Stoic stillness is not stagnation. It is the inner stability from which effective action becomes possible. It is the difference between a warrior who fights from a place of panic and exhausted reactivity and a warrior who fights from a place of trained, centered, disciplined readiness. The second warrior does not fight less. He fights better. His actions arise from a settled core rather than from the chaos of unmanaged emotion, and as a result they are more accurate, more effective, and more sustainable over time. The stillness is not the absence of action. It is the quality from which the best action flows. This distinction matters practically because many people who encounter Stoic philosophy for the first time are looking for permission to disengage, to use the idea of acceptance as a reason to stop trying, to dress resignation in the clothing of philosophy. The Stoics would have recognized this immediately as what it is, not wisdom, but its counterfeit. The Stoic acceptance of what cannot be changed coexists with full commitment to what can be changed. These are not in tension. They are complementary. You cannot bring your full capacity to bear on what you can change if you are exhausting yourself raging against what you cannot. The acceptance of unchangeable reality frees up the energy that needs to go into changeable reality. The man who achieves Stoic stillness is not the man who has nothing left to want or build. He is the man who has learned to want well, to want what is worth wanting, to build what is worth building, to pursue what can actually be pursued without distorting his inner life in the process. He moves through the world with the quality of presence and attention that makes everything he does more effective. He is not racing. He is not chasing. He is not reacting. He is moving, steadily, purposefully, with the full weight of his prepared and cultivated self, toward what genuinely matters. That is not stagnation. That is the highest form of motion available to a human being. One of the more subtle teachings in the Stoic tradition concerns the relationship between ambition and timing, the wisdom to understand not just where you are going but where you currently are in the journey, and what that particular position requires of you. Marcus Aurelius wrote about this in terms of each day having its own character, its own specific demands, its own particular opportunities for virtue and growth. He did not approach every day as though it were identical, as though the same strategy and the same energy investment would produce the same results regardless of circumstance. He read the situation he was in and responded to it appropriately. The practical wisdom here is that there are seasons of building and seasons of harvest, seasons of expansion and seasons of consolidation, seasons of speaking and seasons of listening, seasons of gathering and seasons of releasing. The man who does not respect these natural rhythms, who tries to harvest before the building is complete, who speaks when listening would serve him better, who expands when his foundation needs consolidating, wastes effort and creates instability. The wise Stoic develops the sensitivity to recognize which season he is in and the discipline to act accordingly rather than in accordance with what he wishes the season were. In the context of focusing on yourself and staying silent, respecting the season means recognizing when you are in a season of becoming, a period when the work is internal, the growth is private, and the most valuable thing you can do is to continue building without needing the process to be witnessed or validated. This season may last longer than you expected. It may require more patience than your ego is comfortable with. But the patience you bring to it, the quality of attention you give to the invisible work of this season, will determine the quality of what becomes visible in the season that follows. Seneca spoke of the importance of not forcing the fruit, of understanding that things that are genuinely good take the time they take to develop, and that the attempt to accelerate the process by cutting it short tends to produce something that looks ready on the outside but is not ready on the inside. Character cannot be forced to maturity. Wisdom cannot be rushed into existence. The deep understanding of yourself and the world that makes genuinely great work possible requires the patient accumulation of experience, reflection, failure, and honest engagement with reality over a period long enough for real depth to develop. You cannot shortcut the season, but you can use it fully, which is all the Stoics ever asked. Everything we have explored in this teaching comes down to a single, definitive act, the decision to let the work speak for itself. Not the announcement of the work. Not the performance of the work. Not the carefully managed brand narrative around the work. The work itself, the actual, concrete, substantive output of focused attention, sustained effort, honest engagement, and genuine care. That work, done with full integrity and brought to completion without the distortion of premature public exposure, speaks in a language that no amount of self-promotion can replicate. Marcus Aurelius's Meditations were never intended to be read by anyone except Marcus Aurelius. They were private notes, reflections and reminders that a man wrote to himself in the service of his own character development. And yet they have survived more than 2,000 years and continue to speak to human beings across cultures, religions, political systems, and centuries of change. Not because Marcus Aurelius designed them to be persuasive. Not because he was managing his philosophical brand. But because they were real, genuinely, nakedly, unperformedly real, and real things tend to outlast the performances that surround them. Epictetus began as a slave with no property and no credentials. He built a philosophical school not by advertising his curriculum or managing his reputation but by thinking carefully, teaching honestly, and producing students who went on to become the leaders, writers, and thinkers who defined the intellectual life of the ancient world. The work spoke. The students who came to him came because of what was actually in the room when he taught, not because of what he said about what was in the room. The substance preceded the reputation. The reputation was simply the echo of the substance. Seneca's letters to Lucilius were not written for publication. They were written to one person, in the honest, exploratory, occasionally self-contradictory way that genuine philosophical correspondence takes when it is not being performed for an audience. And precisely because they were not performed, because they carried the unmistakable weight of a mind actually working through the questions it claims to address, they have resonated across the centuries with a depth and immediacy that more polished, more public documents rarely achieve. The invitation that this entire teaching has been building toward is this: go do your work. Do it with full attention and full honesty and full commitment to the quality that it deserves. Do it in the silence that protects the process and purifies the product. Do it with the patience of someone who understands that genuinely good things require genuinely good conditions, and that the best condition you can give your most important work is the privacy that allows it to become what it needs to be before it meets the world. And when it is done, when it is truly ready, built with everything you had and tested against your highest standards, let it out. Let it speak. It will not need you to accompany it with explanations and defenses. If the work is genuinely good, it will find its audience, build its reputation, and earn the kind of attention that lasts far longer than anything you could have generated by announcing its arrival in advance. We come now to the deepest truth in the entire Stoic tradition, the one that all of the other teachings have been building toward, the one that Marcus Aurelius returned to in his journals again and again because it was the hardest to embody and the most essential to pursue. The man who masters himself is the most powerful kind of person in any room, in any era, in any circumstance. Not because self-mastery gives him power over others. The Stoics explicitly rejected the pursuit of power over others as a worthy goal. But because self-mastery gives him power over the one domain that is actually his, the domain of his own responses, his own choices, his own values, his own contribution to the world. External mastery, mastery of other people, of markets, of political systems, of social situations, is always conditional. It depends on factors outside your control, and those factors shift. The most powerful emperor in the world is still subject to plague, betrayal, and the certainty of his own death. The wealthiest man in any era still wakes up in the morning in a body and a mind that have their own vulnerabilities and their own non-negotiable needs. The most famous person in any culture still has an inner life that no amount of recognition can quiet if that inner life has not been properly tended. External mastery without internal mastery is always precarious, a castle built on sand, beautiful and impressive until the tide comes in. Internal mastery, the mastery of yourself, is the only form of dominion that cannot be taken from you. Epictetus knew this from the most extreme possible position. A man can enslave your body, but he cannot enslave your judgment. A man can control your circumstances, but he cannot control your response to your circumstances. A man can take from you everything you have, but he cannot take from you who you are, unless you surrender your identity to him through inattention, through the gradual erosion of your principles under the sustained pressure of his control. The mastery Epictetus described was not theatrical. It was not defiant posturing. It was the simple, profound daily practice of keeping your inner life clean, your principles intact, and your responses aligned with your values regardless of what was being done to your body, your circumstances, or your reputation. What does self-mastery look like in the world you actually live in? It looks like the person who stays grounded when the meeting goes sideways, who listens without performing while everyone else is performing, who chooses the response that serves the outcome rather than the one that serves the ego, who maintains their standard of work when the standard is optional, who keeps their commitments when no one would notice the breaking of them. It looks like the person who does not need to be the loudest in the room because they know that what they have built is more substantial than anything volume can convey. It looks like the person who is fully present in the conversations that deserve their presence, and fully absent from the ones that deserve only their absence. It looks like someone who has done the work, the long, quiet, unglamorous, enormously rewarding work of building a self that they can trust, live inside of comfortably, and offer generously to the people and purposes that deserve it. That is who you are building. That is what this year can be for you. Not a year of announcement and performance and the desperate, exhausting management of other people's perceptions of your progress. A year of genuine, private, focused Stoic work, the kind that produces the kind of person that the world will be genuinely better for having known. As you move forward from this moment, from this teaching, from this transmission of wisdom that has survived the centuries because it is built on truth rather than trend, there are a handful of commitments worth carrying with you into the year ahead. Not a long list of resolutions you will forget by the end of the month. A small number of genuine philosophical commitments that, if held seriously and practiced daily, will transform the quality of your life more thoroughly than any external strategy or program ever could. Commit to silence in the places where your voice is not adding genuine value. Not permanent silence, not cowardly silence, but the disciplined silence of a person who has decided that their words will mean something because they will not waste them. Let the quiet speak for you in the spaces where the loudest people are saying the least. Let the work that is done in silence be the testimony that your noise never could be. Commit to focus in the places where the world most wants to distract you. Start with your morning. Protect the first hour of your day with everything you have. Do not give it to the phone, the news, the ambient noise of a culture that wants your attention for purposes that are not your own. Give it to yourself, to the practice of honest self-examination, clear intention, and the cultivation of the qualities that matter most to you. Commit to building in secret for long enough that the building is genuinely ready to be seen. Resist the impulse to announce before you have arrived. Resist the substitute satisfaction of performance in the place of actual production. Let the hunger that comes from holding your vision privately fuel the work, and trust that what is being built in that private space is developing the depth and integrity that premature public exposure would have prevented. Commit to releasing the energy you have been spending on explanations, defenses, and the management of other people's perceptions of you. That energy belongs to your work, your growth, your relationships of genuine depth, your actual life. Take it back. Use it wisely. The people who matter will not require the constant management of their impression. The people who require constant impression management are not the ones whose opinion of you should be determining how you spend your most valuable resource. Commit, above all, to the Stoic recognition that the quality of your inner life, the health of your reasoning, the alignment of your actions with your values, the consistency of your character across the full range of circumstances you encounter, is the only measure of success that actually matters in the long run. Not what you have. Not what people think of you. Not the speed at which the visible markers of external success are accumulating. The quality of who you are becoming, measured by your own honest and rigorous standard. You made it to the end of this teaching, and that tells you something. Most people will not. Most people will hear the first few minutes, recognize something true, feel something stir inside them, and then the phone will buzz, or the notification will pull, or the familiar gravity of the habitual life will reassert its claim, and they will drift back. Not because they are weak, but because the pull of the familiar is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology, and resisting it requires the very stoic discipline that a teaching like this one is trying to build. You stayed. You kept your attention on something long enough for it to actually reach you. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, the first practice, the practice of sustained, voluntary, intentional attention, applied in the most direct way possible. And if you can do it here, in the space of a single teaching, you can do it in the space of your actual life. You can bring that quality of sustained, intentional presence to the work that matters most to you, to the relationships that deserve it, to the morning practice that will shape the year ahead, to the private building that will produce the public testimony that your best self deserves. The Stoics did not promise an easy life. They promised something better, a meaningful one. A life in which the difficulty was met with dignity, the loss was met with grace, the challenge was met with the full capacity of a prepared and practiced human being, and the good days, the days when the work goes well and the connections are deep and the inner life is settled enough to let the world's beauty actually land, those days are lived with full, grateful, unhurried presence. That life is available to you. Not someday, not after the circumstances improve, not when you finally have enough of whatever you currently feel you lack. Now. In this year. In the choices you make beginning tomorrow morning when you wake up and decide what the first hour of your day is for. Focus on yourself. Stay silent where silence serves you. Build in the dark. Let the work speak. And come back to this channel for the next teaching, because we have much more ground to cover, and the further we go into this material, the more powerful it becomes. Subscribe to the Stoic Edge right now if you have not already. Leave a comment letting the community know which part of this teaching hit hardest. Share this with someone in your life who is ready for this conversation. And know that the work you are doing in the quiet, the invisible, daily, unglamorous, utterly essential work of becoming the person you are capable of being, is the most important work happening anywhere in your world. The Stoic Edge. Every week. Built for the person who is done performing and ready to start building. We will see you in the next one.